If you've ever shown kindness to a stranger and had no idea what you just set in motion, this story is for you. On a rain-soaked Boston City bus, a broke librarian splits her last sandwich with a silent stranger. She never knew he controlled the most dangerous criminal empire on the East Coast. He never knew that one small act of kindness would make him question everything he'd spent 30 years building, and make him the most dangerous kind of man there is. One with something to lose. Watch until the end. Hit that like button, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came in sideways that Thursday night, the kind of rain that had no patience for umbrellas and even less for the people of Boston who thought they could outrun it. It hammered the roof of the number 39 bus in long, irregular bursts, like something angry was trying to get in. The windows had fogged over from the breath of commuters who were too tired to talk and too wet to care, and the fluorescent tube at the back of the bus flickered every 30 seconds with the reliability of a failing heart. Elena Whitlock sat in the third row from the rear because the heating vent was directly beneath that seat, and her left shoe had a crack in the sole that let water in. She'd been meaning to replace them for 4 months. She'd been meaning to do a lot of things for 4 months. Her library bag sat between her feet, heavy with returned children's books she'd taken home to repair over the weekend, 3 of them with torn spines and 1 with what she was fairly certain was applesauce dried into the pages. And her coat, a tan wool thing she'd bought secondhand in 2019, was damp through the left shoulder where she'd misjudged the awning outside the diner. She'd worked the lunch shift at Hannigan's before the library because the library's part-time salary did not cover Marcus's school lunches, his winter boots that he'd already destroyed the toe on, and the water heater that had been making a sound like a dying animal since October. She smelled like fryer grease and old books, which was, she had come to accept, simply the smell of her life. The bus lurched forward from the Boylston stop, and Elena opened the paper bag on her lap. 1 sandwich. Turkey on sourdough made it 7 that morning before Marcus woke up, because mornings in their apartment were already a negotiation between 2 people who needed the bathroom at the same time, and only one of them had remembered to restock the toilet paper. She'd meant to eat it at noon. She hadn't eaten it at noon because a 7-year-old named Priya had come into the library in tears because the book she'd ordered through interlibrary loan hadn't arrived, and it was due for her class report tomorrow. And Elena had spent her lunch break on the phone tracking it down at the Roxbury branch and arranging a courier drop, and by the time she'd hung up, there were 14 minutes left before the after-school program started, and she still hadn't cataloged the new donations. So, 1 sandwich, 8:15 at night. She unwrapped it halfway, already tasting it in her mind, and that's when she noticed the man. He was sitting in the very last row, all the way against the window on the left side, and he was wrong for the bus in a way that was hard to immediately name. Not dangerously wrong, not the kind of wrong that made her grip her bag. Just out of place, the way a word you've written too many times suddenly looks like it's spelled incorrectly even though nothing has changed. His coat was expensive. She could tell that even in the bus's bad light, even soaked through as it was, the cut of it, the way it sat on his shoulders, the collar that wasn't a cheap collar. His shoes, what she could see of them under the seat in front of him, were leather. Real leather, not the convincing synthetic kind. His hands were folded in his lap, and there was a gash along the outside of his left palm that had been cleaned but not properly treated, and the skin around it was angry and raised. He was staring at nothing, not his phone, she checked, and there was no phone in his hands. Not the window, because the window was nothing but black and rain. He was staring at a point in space roughly 18 inches in front of his face, and his jaw was set in the particular way of a man who was either in significant pain or working very hard to feel nothing at all. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just survived something. She almost looked away. She was good at looking away. It was a skill you developed when you spent enough of your life just barely holding your own situation together. Other people's emergencies had a weight to them that she couldn't always afford to carry. Marcus needed her functional. The library needed her present. She had $18 in her checking account until Friday, and a sandwich she hadn't eaten since 7 that morning. She looked at the sandwich. She looked at the man. He was not young, late 50s, maybe 60, with silver at his temples and a face that had been handsome once and was still striking now in the way that weathered things are striking. You understood that something had happened to it, that the lines and the shadows weren't accidents but records. His eyes, when they briefly tracked to the door as someone exited at the Tremont stop, were very dark and very still, and they moved with the kind of controlled economy that meant he was used to watching everything and showing nothing. He hadn't eaten. She didn't know how she knew that, but she did. It was the same way she'd learned to read Marcus when he was pretending he wasn't hungry because he thought they couldn't afford it. There was a particular quality to a person's stillness when they were running on empty and trying not to admit it. Elena Whitlock looked at her sandwich one more time. She pulled apart the wax paper, tore the sandwich evenly down the middle, or as evenly as you could manage on a moving bus, rewrapped one half, and stood up. The bus swayed. She caught the overhead bar, moved down the aisle, and stopped at the last row. The man's eyes came up to her face immediately, and they were not friendly eyes, not right away. They were the eyes of someone who had learned that strangers approaching him usually wanted something, and that what they wanted was rarely good. "I'm not going to sit down," she said, because she wasn't going to, because she could read the tension in his shoulders, and she had no interest in crowding him. You look like you haven't eaten, and I have more than I need." She held out the half sandwich. "Turkey, no mustard. I'm sorry about the mustard. I forgot to put it on this morning, and I didn't have time to go back." He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. "I don't need your food," he said. His voice was low and even and carried the faint residue of an accent she couldn't quite place. Not Boston, not New York, something older and further away. "Probably not," she agreed. "But I have half a sandwich I'm not going to finish, and it's just going to be sat in my bag all night if you don't take it. So." She set it on the seat beside him. Not in his hands, not pressed on him. Just set it there, the way you'd leave something for a stray animal that needed to decide for itself whether to trust you. Then she went back to her seat and ate her half of the sandwich and watched the rain on the window and did not look at him again. She heard after a moment the soft sound of wax paper unfolding. His name was Lucien Vescari, and Elena Whitlock had no way of knowing that. She had no way of knowing that 2 hours earlier a man named Draco Hines had put a bullet past Lucian's left ear in a parking structure on Summer Street, close enough that Lucian had felt the pressure change before he heard the sound. She didn't know that Draco Hines was currently not in a position to shoot anyone, and that 2 of Lucian's men had handled the situation with a brisk efficiency that left no witnesses and required 2 phone calls to people who were very good at making things disappear. She didn't know that Lucian had sent his driver away because he needed to think, needed the anonymity of public transit and rain-blurred windows, and the ordinary smell of wet coats and someone's fast food bag, needed 60 minutes where no one knew where he was and no one was looking at him like he was a problem to be managed. She didn't know that in 31 years of operating at the highest and most dangerous levels of organized crime on the Eastern Seaboard, through 3 FBI investigations, 2 Senate subcommittees that couldn't prove anything, and a career body count that he had long since stopped thinking about in any concrete numerical terms, not one person had ever simply given Lucien Vescari half of their dinner with an apology about the mustard, and then gone back to their seat without waiting for anything in return. He sat with that for a long time, after she got off at the Washington Street stop, her library bag bumping against her hip, her cracked shoe hitting the wet pavement as she turned the corner without looking back. He ate the sandwich. It was, he thought, the best thing he had tasted in years, and he knew that made no logical sense because it was gas station quality turkey on bread that had gone slightly soft from being in a bag all day, and he had eaten at restaurants with 3 Michelin stars and private chefs who'd trained in Paris and Tokyo. But those people had all wanted something from him. The woman on the bus had wanted nothing. He couldn't stop thinking about that. Lucien had built his empire the way most empires get built, through a combination of ruthlessness, timing, and the particular clarity of vision that comes to people who grow up with nothing and decide very young that they will never be nothing again. He'd come up in the Vesker crew out of Providence, Rhode Island, his father's operation, small-time loan sharking and numbers running in the Federal Hill neighborhood, the kind of street-level work that kept the lights on and kept 3 younger siblings in school shoes. His father had been a careful man, not a violent man by preference, though violence was available when needed. A man who believed in the careful cultivation of relationships, in patience, in the long game. Lucien had inherited the patience and abandoned the carefulness. By the time he was 32, He had absorbed 4 competing operations along the I-95 corridor, established the most reliable pharmaceutical distribution network between Boston and Miami, and cultivated enough legitimate business holdings, construction, commercial real estate, 2 restaurant groups, a private equity fund that was exactly as legitimate as it needed to be, to make the federal interest in him expensive and largely unproductive. The FBI had opened 4 separate files on him over the course of 2 decades. They had closed 3 of them with nothing. The 4th was technically still active, in the sense that it occupied space on a server in the Boston field office, but the agent who'd been most passionate about it had retired 2 years ago, and his replacement had higher priority problems. He was, in the language of the world he operated in, untouchable, which made the bullet past his left ear on Thursday evening particularly interesting. It wasn't a random act. Random acts didn't happen at that level. When someone tried to kill Lucien Viscari, it meant a deliberate decision had been made by someone with enough information to know his schedule, his routes, and the specific vulnerability window that existed between the parking structure and his car. That level of access meant someone inside. Not a competitor, not a foreign entity moving into his territory. Someone who ate at his table and knew where he kept his knives. He had a list of 3 names by the time the bus reached his stop, and he added a 4th on the walk home through the rain, and none of those names surprised him, which was the thing about this life that he had made his peace with a very long time ago. It didn't surprise you anymore. It just confirmed things you already knew. What surprised him was the sandwich. What surprised him was that he was still thinking about it 3 days later. His personal assistant's name was Vincent Rao, and Vincent had worked for Lucien for 11 years and had the specific quality of being able to read a room with the speed and accuracy of a man whose continued employment depended on not misreading rooms, which it did. So when Lucien came into the office on Friday morning and sat down at his desk and then said, without preamble, "I want to know about the woman on the 39 bus Thursday night. Washington Street stop, library bag, tan coat, soaked left shoulder." Vincent wrote it down and did not ask any questions. He had answers by Saturday afternoon. Elena Whitlock, 34 years old, born in Worcester, Massachusetts, degree in library science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, graduated with honors, had been accepted to a graduate program in archival studies at Columbia University in New York. She had not attended. Her sister, Caroline Whitlock Braun, had died of a sudden cardiac event 18 months before the program was set to begin, leaving behind a 7-year-old son named Marcus and a husband who had responded to the crisis by removing himself from the situation with a thoroughness that left no forwarding address. Elena had deferred her enrollment once, then again, and then she had withdrawn. She had taken a position at the Roslindale branch of the Boston Public Library. She was currently working part-time there and supplementing with shifts at a diner called Hannigan's on Center Street. She was behind on her water heater. She drove a 2011 Honda Civic with a registration that was current because she was careful about the things that would get her pulled over. She had no criminal record, no civil judgments, no outstanding debts except the small and ordinary ones. She had a library card she'd had since she was 9 years old, renewed at every address she'd ever lived. She was, by every measurable indicator, a person of no significance whatsoever. Lucien read the file twice. Then he read the part about Columbia University again. He set the file down and looked out the window of his office, which was on the 14th floor of a building he owned in the Seaport District, and which had a view of the harbor that was, on clear days, genuinely beautiful. Today was not a clear day. The harbor was gray-green and restless, and the far shore was barely visible through the haze. She gave up a graduate program, he said. To raise her nephew, yes, Vincent said from near the door, because Vincent knew when to stay near the door. How old is the kid now? 8. He'll be 9 in February. Lucien nodded slowly. What's the library situation? Vincent checked his notes. Understaffed. The branch has been running at about 60% of what it needs since a budget cut in 2022. They've been fundraising independently. She runs an after-school reading program on Tuesdays and Thursdays, does Storytime on Saturday mornings. They have approximately $4,000 in their community improvement fund, which is about $15,000 short of what they need to renovate the children's section. Lucien looked at the file again. at the name Columbia University, written in Vincent's neat, angular handwriting. "All right," he said, "that's enough." It wasn't, though. He kept the file. The Roslindale branch of the Boston Public Library occupied a building that had originally been a small neighborhood bank, which meant it had high ceilings, beautiful original woodwork that the city of Boston had somehow managed not to destroy during any of the 4 renovations, and absolutely terrible acoustics, because a building designed to hold echoing transaction sounds was not designed to encourage children to whisper. Elena had learned to work inside the noise. The after-school crowd was loud in the way of children who had been contained all day and were not yet ready to be contained again, and she moved through them with the practiced ease of someone who had long ago stopped expecting quiet and started expecting life. It was on the second Tuesday after the bus, at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon, that she first saw him again. She was at the reference desk, helping a teenager find primary sources for a paper on the Boston Massacre that was due tomorrow and had not been started, which was a crisis she was managing with the calm patience of someone who had managed it many times before, when the door opened and he walked in. She recognized him immediately and couldn't have said why, because he looked completely different. The expensive rain-soaked coat was gone. He was wearing a plain dark jacket over a gray sweater, the kind of clothes that cost a specific amount, not cheap, not showy, and he was carrying a canvas bag that might have been from any number of bookstores, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was looking around the library with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who had just walked into a place for the first time and was orienting himself. His left hand, she noticed. The gash on his left palm. It was healing. He found the paperback section, pulled one out, looked at the back, put it back. He moved to the periodicals. He sat down at one of the tables near the window and opened a magazine and read it with the particular stillness she remembered from the bus. He was there for 45 minutes. He didn't approach the desk. He didn't speak to anyone. When he left, he nodded to her briefly on his way out. Not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement, the way you might nod to someone you owed a small debt to. And then the door closed behind him, and he was gone. She almost mentioned it to Diane, the other librarian on shift, and then she didn't because she wasn't sure what she would say. A man from a bus came in and read a magazine. That was not a sentence that required sharing. He was back Thursday. This time he checked out a book. She processed the card he'd set up. Daniel Crest, the name read, and she noted it without emphasis, and handed him his copy of The Power Broker, which was either a very ordinary choice for a man who wanted to appear like a reader or a very revealing choice for a man who thought about power for a living, and she wasn't sure yet which one he was. "It's a long one," she said. 800 pages. "I have time," he said. "You'll want to read it slowly," she said. "Caro rewards patience." He looked at her with the same unreadable quality she remembered from the bus, and then something shifted slightly at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. "I'll keep that in mind." He left. The following Tuesday, he was back with the book half read, which meant he'd done approximately 200 pages in 5 days, which was not reading slowly. He sat at the table by the window again, and this time, when the after-school rush descended and 2 small boys got into a dispute over the single remaining copy of a graphic novel series, and the dispute escalated into something that required intervention, he watched her manage it with what she could only describe as attention, not idle curiosity, not the uncomfortable observation of someone who wished the noise would stop, but genuine attention, like someone watching a skill being demonstrated. When she came back to the desk, he said without looking up from his book, "The one on the left was going to cry." "He always cries," she said. "His name is Devin. He feels things very loudly." "And the other one?" "Marcus is 8 and thinks that if he doesn't show he's upset, it means he isn't upset." She paused. "Marcus is my nephew." He looked up then. Something in his face was different. Not softer exactly, but less armored. "He comes here after school?" "Every Tuesday and Thursday. This is basically his second home." She straightened a stack of books on the counter. "It's fine. The other staff know him. He does his homework in the back room. Mostly." There was a pause that didn't feel uncomfortable in the way silences between strangers usually feel uncomfortable. It felt more like 2 people standing at a window looking at the same thing. You work 2 jobs, he said. It wasn't a question. Most people do, she said. Most people don't. He said it without judgment, just correction. Most people want to, but can't make the schedules work. You made the schedules work. She looked at him directly. You're very observant for a man who's only been coming here 2 weeks. 3 weeks, he said. The first time I came in, you were helping someone with the microfiche machine and you didn't see me. I didn't stay long. She didn't know what to do with that, so she handed a patron their hold and let the moment pass. His name wasn't Daniel Crest. She didn't know that yet. By November, he was coming in 4 times a week. Not always for long, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. He worked his way through the Caro books with methodical intensity and then shifted to history, large-scale economic histories and biographies of industrialists, the kind of reading that suggested someone who was thinking seriously about how systems of power got built and sustained and dismantled. She began to notice what he didn't check out as much as what he did. He never took fiction. He never took anything self-help or motivational. He took dense, demanding books about real things, and he read them the way she imagined a person would eat a meal they actually needed rather than wanted. Their conversations at the desk were brief and oblique in the way of people who were both being careful. She told him about the library's budget situation because it came up naturally, because she was always thinking about it, because the children's section ceiling had developed a water stain that she was watching with the grim vigilance of a woman who knew what came after water stains. He listened without offering anything, which she appreciated, because the men she'd known in her life who listened to problems tended to immediately want to solve them rather than hear them. And Elena had enough of her life already being managed by necessity that she valued being heard without being handled. He told her almost nothing about himself. He mentioned once that he had grown up in Providence. He mentioned another time that he had a sister who he didn't speak to often enough. Once, when Marcus had come out of the back room with a math worksheet that was defeating him and Elena had spent 15 minutes at the desk working through it with him, the man she knew as Daniel had watched the whole thing without pretending not to. And when Marcus went back to the table, he said, "You're good at explaining things without making people feel stupid." "That's the whole job," she said. "No," he said. "That's a gift. The job is just the container." She thought about that for the rest of the week. She didn't tell Diane about him. She didn't know why. He wasn't a secret exactly. He was a library patron, he had a card, his checkouts were in the system under a name she now suspected wasn't his. But she held the fact of him close in the way you hold something you're not sure about yet, something that might matter and might not. And you don't want to name it out loud before you understand what it is. In the meantime, other things happened. Cassian Rourke, who was 38 years old and had been Lucienne's underboss for 6 years, and whose ambition was the kind that kept itself very quiet and very patient, had noticed the shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small signals that Cassian, who was an exceptionally good reader of people, had been filing away and cross-referencing since sometime in late October. Lucienne was distracted in meetings, not inattentive, but present in a different way, like a man who had begun to think about a second life layered underneath the primary one. He'd put a pause on 2 expansion projects in the South Shore that had been in planning for months and hadn't given a reason that satisfied Cassian. He'd turned down a contract that would have netted the organization significant revenue and had done so over the phone with one of his lieutenants in a way that was completely unlike his normal, methodical decision-making process. And 3 weeks ago, Cassian had followed him. Not personally. Cassian was not the kind of man who did his own surveillance. He had people for that. One of them had taken photographs of Lucienne entering and exiting a public library branch in Roslindale on 6 separate occasions. Cassian had looked at the photographs for a long time. Then he'd had his people find out who worked at the Roslindale branch. He read Elena Whitlock's file with the focused patience of a man who had learned that the key to dismantling any fortress was finding the door that had been left open. Not the main gate, not the fortified wall, but the small, unguarded place that the fortress's owner didn't even know they'd forgotten to lock. Elena Whitlock was, he thought, a very interesting door. He wasn't ready to use her yet. That was the kind of move you made once, and it had to be exactly right, which meant the timing had to be exactly right, which meant he needed to know more about what exactly was happening in that library between Lucien Vescari and a 34-year-old librarian who smelled like fryer grease and old books. He was patient. He had always been patient. He put the file in the locked drawer of his desk and went back to the business of the day. The December charity gala was at the Mandarin Oriental, which was the kind of venue that cost more per plate than Elena made in a week at either of her jobs. And she was there because the library had been invited to participate in a non-profit showcase. 6 minutes at a standing display table in the pre-dinner reception hall with a trifold board she'd made at the copy shop and printed photographs of the children's section and the Storytime program and a QR code linking to their donation page. She'd borrowed Diane's black dress because she didn't own one that qualified, and Diane was 2 inches taller than her and a size larger across the shoulders, so the dress fit in the approximate sense that it covered all the required surfaces and stayed up, which was the benchmark she'd set for herself that morning when she'd gotten it out of the garment bag. She'd gotten there early because she always got there early, because being early was the only reliable hedge she had against the unpredictability of everything else, and she'd set up her table and arranged her printed materials with the care of someone who understood that she was asking people with significant resources to care about children who had none, which required presenting the case with both precision and heart, because people at this level could smell the difference between the two and responded poorly to an imbalance. By 7:30, the room was full. By 8, she had spoken to approximately 40 people, given her 6-minute pitch approximately 18 times, collected 11 business cards from people who said they'd be in touch, which she estimated meant 2 or 3 actual follow-up contacts, which she estimated meant 1 donation of any significance, which she was choosing to call a win. Her feet hurt. The dress kept doing something uncomfortable at the left shoulder. She'd eaten 1 piece of cheese and a cracker from the circulating appetizer trays because the trays were circulating faster than she could intercept them without abandoning her table. The women arrived at 8:15. There were 3 of them, and they were the kind of women who traveled in formation. The arrangement was practiced and deliberate, the way military units move. The social hierarchy embedded in the 3-inch gap between the one in front and the 2 slightly behind her. The one in front had the particular posture of someone who had grown up with money rather than acquiring it, which is a different posture entirely, and she looked at Elena's table with the specific expression of someone who has just found something amusing in a way that has nothing to do with humor. "Is this the library table?" she said. Her name, Elena would learn later, was Marguerite Ashford, and she sat on the boards of 4 foundations and had attended this gala every year for 12 years and donated the minimum required to maintain her social positioning without ever once being moved by anything she'd seen there. "Yes," Elena said. "The Roslyn Dale branch. We're raising funds for the children's section renovation." Roslindale. Marguerite said the word the way you might say the name of a street you'd once got a flat tire on. "And you put this together yourself?" She was looking at the trifold board. "I did. It's very thorough." One of the women behind her made a sound that was technically a laugh. "The photographs are charming. Are those your children?" "They're the children who use the library." "Of course." Marguerite tilted her head. "And what do you do when you're not doing this?" Elena understood the question perfectly. She had been being asked this question in one form or another her entire adult life, which was, "What are you, precisely, and how did you come to be here, among us, in a room for which you are not sufficiently equipped?" It was a question delivered with the perfect plausible deniability of a parent's social curiosity, and she had never found an answer to it that didn't leave her feeling like something had been taken from her. "I work at the library," she said. "And I waitress. Both. At the same time, most weeks." There was a pause. The woman on Marguerite's left said very quietly to the woman on her right, "They invited the library and the diner." The other woman bit down on a smile. Elena's jaw tightened. She reached for the QR code handout. "If you'd like more information about the donation options—" "I think we're fine," Marguerite said, already turning away. "Thank you so much for coming. I'm sure the children appreciate the effort." It was, Elena would later calculate, approximately the 47th most humiliating moment of her adult life, which put it in the top tier, but not at the summit. She had a whole interior ranking system for these moments, developed over years, because cataloging things was what she did, and because naming something precisely was the only way she'd ever found to make it smaller. She breathed. She straightened her handout materials. She picked up her water glass. The room went quiet. Not all at once. It was more like a wave moving across still water. She heard the sound start to shift from her left, moving right, the way a crowd shifts when something has happened that everyone in the room needs to process simultaneously. She looked up. Lucien Vescari was standing 20 feet away, and he was looking directly at her. She didn't know who he was. She knew him as Daniel Crest, library card number BPL-2024-08847, who read Robert Caro and didn't take fiction and watched Marcus do his math homework with the focused attention of a man who had forgotten what ordinary things looked like. But the room knew who he was. She could feel it, the particular recalibration happening around her, the social gravitational field shifting as every person with any awareness of Boston's power structure registered where Lucien Vescari was looking and began to calculate what that meant. He walked toward her. Marguerite Ashford, who was 3 steps away, said, "Lucien, I've been hoping to speak with you about the waterfront parcel." And he walked past her as though she hadn't spoken. The 2 women behind her went still. He stopped at Elena's table. He looked at her trifold board. He looked at her face. "Your dress is borrowed," he said. "The shoulder," she said. "Yes." "Diane is 2 inches taller." "I know." He picked up one of her handouts. He looked at it for a moment. The water stain. Still spreading. He put the handout back. He turned to face the room, Trubisky. Or rather, he turned so that he was standing beside her table, shoulder to shoulder with her, facing the gathered gala crowd. Several hundred people who were all pretending not to be watching them, with the focused intensity of people who understood that something was happening that would be worth knowing about later. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the way certain voices carry. The way voices carry when they have spent decades in rooms where people listen because the alternative is unfavorable. 3 months ago, he said, I was on a bus in the rain. I hadn't eaten. I wasn't in a good place. He paused. A woman I didn't know sat 3 rows ahead of me and noticed I hadn't eaten, and she split her last sandwich in half and left it next to me without making it into something, without making it into a moment. She just left it and went back to her seat. The room was completely silent. I've had dinner at Per Se, he said. I've had dinner at Chez Panisse and Noma and a restaurant in Tokyo that you wait 2 years to get a reservation for. I've eaten things that cost more than most people's car payments. He looked at the handout in Elena's display. That half sandwich on a bus in the rain is the best thing I've eaten in 30 years. And I've been trying to figure out ever since what exactly makes the difference. He turned back to the table. He looked at Elena, who was standing very still with her water glass. I think it's that she didn't need me to be grateful, he said. She just saw a person and acted accordingly. He reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the table beside her QR code display. She looked at it. It was a check. She looked at the number on the check and then she looked at it again because the first time she looked at it, she thought she'd misread it. She hadn't misread it. For the children's section, he said, and the ceiling. He picked up her last remaining handout, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket. I'll see you Tuesday, he said. Then he turned and walked back across the room. In the far corner of the reception hall, close enough to the east wall to be largely invisible from the center of the room, Cassian Rourke held a glass of scotch and watched the entire thing with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to men who are watching a door swing open that they have been waiting a very long time to walk through. He looked at the woman at the library table, at the way she was looking at the check, at the particular expression on her face, which was not triumph and was not greed, and was something more complicated and more useful to him than either of those would have been. She mattered to Lucien Vescari. Cassian understood, with the cold and efficient clarity of a man who had built his career on understanding leverage, exactly what that meant. He set down his glass. He took out his phone and sent a text to a number that was not in his contacts under a real name, 3 words only, find the boy. Across the room, Elena Whitlock was still holding the check. Her hand was completely steady because she had not yet understood what she was standing inside of, what machinery had just begun to move, what the cost would be of the moment on the bus when she had split her sandwich and gone back to her seat without waiting for anything in return. She folded the check carefully and put it in the pocket of Diane's borrowed dress. Tuesday, she thought. She would see him Tuesday. She did not know it would be the last ordinary Tuesday either of them would ever have. The check cleared on a Wednesday. Elena knew because she'd been watching the library's account with the focused vigilance of someone who had learned not to trust good things until they were confirmed. And when she saw the number sitting there in the account balance, she sat down in the back office chair and put her face in her hands and stayed like that for approximately 45 seconds, which was as long as she allowed herself before Marcus knocked on the doorframe and asked if there was anything to eat. There was. For once, there definitely was. She didn't call anyone. She didn't post anything. She sat with it the way you sit with something that hasn't finished being real yet, and then she got up and went back to the desk and processed 14 holds and helped a man print his tax documents and read 3 chapters of Goodnight Moon to a 2-year-old whose mother had fallen asleep in the armchair in the picture book section, which happened more often than people might think, and which Elena had a policy of allowing because sleep was a resource, and exhausted mothers were people too. Tuesday came. He was there at 4. He didn't make anything of the check. She appreciated that. He sat at his table. He had a new book. She noted it was the second Caro biography, which meant he was moving through them in order, which was the correct way to do it. And he read it with his particular quality of stillness. And Marcus came out of the back room at 4:30 and stopped when he saw him and said, with the directness of an 8-year-old who had not yet learned that directness was something adults spent years unlearning, "You're the man from the party." Lucian looked up from his book. "I am." "You gave my aunt a check." "I did." Marcus considered this. He was a small, serious child with his mother's eyes and his own particular brand of gravity, the kind of gravity that appears in children who have absorbed more loss than children should have to absorb and have decided to carry it very upright. "Why?" "Marcus," Elena said from the desk. "It's a fair question," Lucian said. He looked at Marcus with the same level, unhurried attention he brought to everything. "Because the library does something important and didn't have enough money to do it properly. And I had money I wasn't using for anything important." Marcus thought about that. "Do you have more?" Marcus. "Also a fair question," Lucy Hu Yen said, and the corner of his mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes." "Our ceiling leaks." "I know. Your aunt told me." Marcus looked at Elena. Elena looked at Marcus. Marcus appeared to make some internal calculation, and then he went back to the table where his homework was waiting, and he sat down and opened his notebook, and the afternoon continued. It was the most ordinary hour Elena had experienced in a very long time, and she didn't understand until much later why ordinary things had started to feel like something she had to protect. Vincent Rao came to Lucian's office on Thursday morning with a face that meant the news was not good, but was not yet catastrophic, which was a specific face that Lucian had learned to read over 11 years. He sat down across the desk and put a folder on the surface between them. "Draco Hines didn't act alone," Vincent said. "I know." "The money came from inside, routed through 3 shells, but the original source it's one of ours." Vincent touched the edge of the folder without opening it. "The authorization trail goes to Cassian." The room didn't change. The light through the seaport windows was the same flat winter gray it had been for weeks. Lucien's coffee sat to his left, and the steam coming off it moved in a slow, unperturbed spiral. "How solid is it?" Lucien said. "Solid enough that I checked it twice before I brought it to you." "And the others on my list?" "2 of them are connected to Cassian. The 3rd is clean? Wrong place, wrong read on your part, sorry." "All right." Lucien opened the folder. He looked at the authorization trail, the account numbers, the routing codes, the dates that aligned with specificity to a timeline he now understood very clearly. He closed the folder. "Does Cassian know we have this?" "No, I kept it to myself and 2 people I trust completely." "Keep it that way." Lucian pushed back from the desk slightly. He had the particular stillness of a man who was not calm but had learned to wear calm over everything else so completely that the difference was invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. I want to know everything he's moving, everything he's looking at. If he makes a call, I want to know about it within the hour. Done. Vincent picked up the folder. There's one more thing. Lucien waited. He had someone pull a file on Elena Whitlock, Vincent said, 3 days ago. The quality of the air in the room changed. Not dramatically, but Vincent felt it, and he had the good sense to sit very still and let it happen. When? Lucy said. The word came out flat and without inflection, which was worse, in Vincent's experience, than if it had come out loud. Monday. The inquiry was low-level, careful. He used a cutout so there's deniability, but it's his people. Vincent paused. He also ran a secondary search for the nephew. Lucien's hands were flat on the desk. He looked at them for a moment. How much does he know? Enough. Name, address, school. Marcus's school. It wasn't a question. Yes. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Vincent's left hand had time to develop a faint tremor that he controlled by pressing his fingers against his thigh under the table. He had been in many rooms with Lucien Vescari over 11 years, and he had seen him make decisions that ended careers and, in some cases, the people those careers belonged to. He had never seen him look the way he looked right now, which was like a man who had just understood the exact dimensions of a mistake he had made and was calculating what it was going to cost him to correct it. Get her a detail, Lucien said finally. Quiet. She doesn't know about it. I don't want her frightened. I want her watched. The boy, too. I want someone on that school by tomorrow morning. And Cassian doesn't move until I say he moves. Lucien stood up. He went to the window. He looked at the harbor. He thinks he's found something. Let him think that for now. Frightened men make bad decisions, but patient men who think they're winning make worse ones. Vincent stood, nodded, went to the door. Vincent? Lucien didn't turn from the window. If anything happens to that boy before I can contain this, if anything... He stopped. He breathed. Nothing happens to that boy. Understood, Vincent said, and he meant it with the totality of a man who understood exactly what was at stake and what would happen if he failed. Cassian Rourke had an apartment in the South End that he kept separate from his official residence, and it was in this apartment on Thursday evening that he met with a man named Foster, who handled the kind of work that required complete deniability and a specific skill set that did not appear on any legitimate resume. Foster was 51 and compact and had the flat, bureaucratic eyes of someone who had spent enough time around violence that it had stopped producing any emotional signal whatsoever. She's more complicated than the file suggests, Cassian said. He was at the kitchen counter with a glass of water because he didn't drink when he was planning something. Drinking was for after. She's not isolated. She has relationships at the library. She has the nephew. She has a small but real network of people who would notice immediately if something happened to her. So she's not the primary, Foster said. No, she's the pressure point. The primary is the boy. Cassian set down his glass. But I'm not moving on the boy until I have the timing exactly right. Because once that happens, everything else happens very fast and I need Lucien in a specific position before the first domino falls. Foster nodded. He had heard this kind of operational language his entire working life, and it produced in him no reaction other than mild professional interest. What's the window? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Cassian picked up the folder on the counter, a different folder from the one Vincent had delivered across town, but covering much of the same ground from a different angle. There's a meeting on the 15th, quarterly review, all the senior people in the same room. If Lucien is destabilized going into that meeting, the transition happens naturally. The senior people aren't loyal to him, they're loyal to the position. If the position is visibly compromised, they move. And Vescari himself? That depends on how destabilized he is. Cassian looked at the folder. A man who's lost something he loves is not a man who thinks clearly. I want him emotional. I want him making decisions from the wrong part of himself. He paused. He's been making those decisions for 2 months already. I just need to accelerate the process. Foster took out a small notebook. I'll need access to the school's external camera system and a reliable pickup point within 3 blocks. I'll have the access to you by Monday. Foster closed the notebook. This is clean work. No witnesses, no residue, no trail back to you. I know, Cassian said. That's why I'm talking to you. Foster left. Cassian stood at his kitchen window and looked at the street below, at the ordinary Thursday night motion of the South End, people walking dogs and coming home from work and carrying grocery bags, the whole apparatus of normal life grinding along underneath the surface of everything. And he felt the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has seen the board clearly and made the correct move. He was wrong about one thing. He was wrong about the timing, because the surveillance he had on Lucien's operations was good but not perfect, and he didn't know about Vincent Rao's Thursday morning conversation, and he didn't know that the detail on Elena and Marcus had been in place since Friday, and he didn't know that Lucien was not, in fact, operating from the wrong part of himself. He was operating from a part of himself that Cassian had no framework for, because it was a part Lucien himself hadn't known was still functional until a woman on a bus had left half a sandwich on the seat beside him without waiting to be thanked. Cassian was planning against a man who wanted power. He didn't know he was actually dealing with a man who had found something worth more than power, which is an entirely different and far more dangerous opponent. Elena felt it on Friday. She couldn't have named it, couldn't have pointed to a specific thing and said there, that's what's wrong. It was more like a texture change. The quality of the street when she walked from the bus stop to the library, the way a car that had been parked outside Hannigan's was still there when she came out 3 hours later, the specific quality of attention she caught from a man in a gray jacket near the school when she picked Marcus up on Thursday afternoon. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present, in a way that raised something old and animal in her chest. She mentioned it to no one. She filed it. Saturday was story time at 9, and she had 12 children and 3 parents and 2 grandparents and 1 very patient golden retriever who belonged to the Marchetti family and who the children had voted unanimously to allow into the library for Saturday sessions on the grounds that he improved the listening environment, which was, Elena had to admit, largely true. She read 2 books and a half, and then the children read to each other, and Marcus sat in the back and watched with the tolerant superiority of someone who had graduated from this stage but retained a fondness for it. And by 11, the room had the particular comfortable chaos of children who have been successfully contained for 2 hours and were ready for the world again. Lucien was there at 11:15. She saw him through the window first, the plain dark jacket, the canvas bag, the unhurried quality of his movement that was so completely inconsistent with what she would later understand about the life he led, that she felt a kind of retroactive vertigo when she finally understood it. The way a landscape you thought you knew reveals that it contains depths you hadn't registered. He bought a coffee from the cart 2 doors down and brought her one without asking if she wanted it, set it on the desk, and sat at the table by the window with a new book she didn't recognize the spine of. There was a man outside the school Thursday, she said. He didn't look up from his book. Gray jacket? She went still. You know about it. He looked up then. He looked at her the way she'd seen him look at difficult problems in the books he read. Directly, without flinching, with the assessment of someone who had decided that honesty was the more efficient option even when it was uncomfortable. I asked someone to keep an eye on the area, you and Marcus both. Why? Because I became aware of a situation that made me cautious. What situation? Her voice was level. The coffee cup was in her hand and she was aware of how tightly she was holding it. What situation, Daniel? The name landed between them differently than it usually did, and she watched him register that, watched him hear in the way she said it that she already half knew the name wasn't his. There are people, he said carefully, who may have noticed that I come here, and who might think that you are. A useful point of leverage, to use against me. The library was quiet. The Saturday morning crowd had mostly dispersed. Diane was in the back room with the returns cart. Marcus was at the table 8 feet away with his headphones in, which meant he was listening to his audiobook and not to them. And Elena knew his audiobook listening face well enough to confirm it. She set down the coffee cup. She kept her voice very low and very steady because there was a child 8 feet away, and she had not survived the last 2 years of her life by falling apart in visible places. What kind of people? She said. The complicated kind. That's not an answer. He looked at her hands, both of them now flat on the desk, which was where she'd put them because she needed the surface under them. He looked at her face. He was doing the calculation she could see him doing, the cost-benefit analysis of what exactly to say to a woman who was not stupid and who already knew more than he'd intended her to know. "I'm not who I said I was," he said. "I know. You know. Daniel Crest isn't a real name. I checked." She had. 3 weeks ago, a small act of professional due diligence that she'd told herself was routine but had known wasn't. The card is real, the address on it is real, but the name doesn't attach to anything before 5 years ago. He breathed. Something in his face shifted. Not surprise, more like the particular expression of a man who is relieved to stop holding something. "My name is Lucienne," he said. "Lucienne Vescari." She held the name in her mind. She searched it against what she knew, which was more than most civilians knew because she was a librarian, and librarians read things that other people don't read. And Boston had a specific literature about its organized crime history that she had processed with the passive absorption of someone who reads everything. And the name reached something. "You're serious," she said. "Yes." "You're—" She stopped. She looked at Marcus. She looked back at him. "The people watching my nephew's school are mine. They're there to keep him safe." "From what?" "From someone who has decided that you are a useful way to get to me." He said it plainly, without softening it, which was the right call. And she could tell he knew it was the right call, that he had decided against softening it because she was not a person who responded to softening, because he had been watching her for 3 months, and he knew what she was. "I'm working on containing the situation. I need a little more time." The blood in her face had moved somewhere else. She was very aware of the physical reality of the space between them. The desk, the 6 feet of library floor, the afternoon light coming through the window behind him. She was very aware of her own breathing, which was controlled and even because she was controlling it. "Marcus," she said, "is safe. Right now, tonight, this week, he's safe. I have people on him." "People." The word came out with an edge. "Criminal people." He didn't flinch. "Yes. You put criminal surveillance on my 8-year-old nephew without asking me." "I did." He held her gaze. "Because asking you would have meant explaining everything before I was ready, and in the time it took me to explain everything, something could have happened. I made a decision. I understand if you're angry about it." "I'm not angry," she said, which was not true, but which was the most she could manage right now without raising her voice, which she was not going to do, not here, not with Marcus 8 feet away. "I'm trying to understand what you've pulled my family into." "You weren't pulled into it," he said. "You were already in it. Cassian, the man who's moving against me, he identified you 3 weeks ago. The moment I walked across that room at the gala. Possibly before." His jaw tightened. "That's my fault, not yours. None of this is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the face she'd been looking at for 3 months across the reference desk and the table by the window, the face she'd thought she understood or was beginning to understand. And she felt the particular vertigo of discovering that the topography you've been navigating has depths you hadn't mapped. "What do you need?" she said finally. He blinked. That surprised him. She could see that it surprised him. "What?" "You said you need a little more time to contain it." She kept her voice even. "What does that require from me?" He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that she didn't have a word for yet. "Act normal," he said. "Don't change your routine. Don't tell anyone. Don't—" He stopped. "Don't disappear on me." She heard the last sentence differently from the others. She thought he heard it differently too, from the slight change in his face after he'd said it. "I'll think about that last part," she said. She picked up her coffee and went back to work. He sat at his table and opened his book, and did not, she noticed, turn a single page for the next 40 minutes. Apan. Monday came in cold and overcast, the temperature dropping 8 degrees overnight in the way of New England Decembers that had no interest in easing anyone into anything. Elena walked Marcus to school because she always walked him to school on Mondays. It was their established routine, and she noted the gray-jacketed man a half-block back without looking at him directly because she had 3 months of experience watching a man who was very good at watching things, and she had learned something from it. She was at the library by 8:45. Diane was already in, the heat was already running, and there were 3 voicemails on the main line from people who wanted to know about the donation in the news, because it had gotten into the news. A brief item in the Globe City section about the anonymous major gift to the Roslindale branch, which was the kind of story that moved through Boston's civic circles with the particular velocity of information that people wanted to have. She was processing the 3rd voicemail when Cassian Rourke walked through the door. She didn't know him. She had no way to know him. He was well dressed in the specific anonymous way of men who understand that anonymity is its own kind of power, and he had a pleasant, open face that gave away nothing, and he stood in the entrance for a moment looking at the space with what appeared to be ordinary curiosity. Then he walked to the desk. "Elena Whitlock," he said. "Can I help you?" "I hope so." He smiled. It was an excellent smile. "I'm interested in making a contribution to the library, a significant one. I heard about the recent gift and I'd love to discuss a matching donation." He put a card on the desk. "I was hoping to speak with you privately, perhaps over coffee." She looked at the card. Clean, simple, a name and a number. No company, no title. She looked at his face. She thought about what Lucien had told her on Saturday. "Someone who has decided that you are a useful way to get to me." She kept her face completely neutral and picked up the card. "That's very generous," she said. "Could I take your number and call you this week to set something up? I have a pretty full schedule today." "Of course." Another smile. "Whenever works for you." He left. She waited until the door closed, then she took out her phone, not the library phone, her own phone, and she typed a text to the number Lucien had given her on Saturday when she'd asked for it with the tone of a woman who was being practical and not asking for reasons she didn't want to examine yet. "A man just came in, said he wants to make a donation. He left a card. The name on the card is Thomas Feld." The response came in 40 seconds. "Don't meet with him. Don't call the number. Can you leave the library in the next hour?" She looked at the card in her hand. "No," she typed back. "I have a program at 10 and Diane is out sick. I can't leave." A pause. Then stay at the desk and stay visible. I'm sending someone." She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at the door through which the man with the excellent smile had just walked. She had a program to run in 40 minutes. She had 14 children coming and 2 volunteers and a stack of books she'd pulled last Thursday for the session. She went to the back room and got the books, and came back to the desk and set them up in the order she needed them, and her hands were completely steady. Because she had learned a very long time ago that the children who came through her door deserved someone whose hands were steady. And she was not going to stop being that person because a well-dressed man with a good smile had put a card on her desk. But she didn't throw the card away. Because she was a librarian and she filed things, and something about the name Thomas Feld, the clean absence of any other identifying information on that card, the way he'd smiled when she'd looked at his face instead of the card, something about all of it was going into the same interior file where she'd been putting the gray-jacketed man outside the school and the car outside Hannigan's and the texture of the last week. And the file was getting heavy in a way that she understood meant it was close to the moment when everything she'd been carefully not thinking about was going to demand to be thought about. She put the card in her desk drawer. She heard the 10 o'clock program beginning to arrive, small feet on the library floor, a child's voice asking about the dog, and being told the dog was only here on Saturdays. She went to work. 20 blocks away, in a building he owned in the Seaport District, Lucien Viscari put down his phone and looked at Vincent Rao and said, in a voice that was very quiet and very clear, "He moved on her directly. He went to the library himself." Vincent said nothing. "He's accelerating," Lucien said. "He's not waiting for the 15th. Which means he's either more confident than we thought, or more scared." "Neither." Lucien picked up his phone again. "Thoughts." He went to the library himself because he wanted to see her. He wanted to make an assessment. He looked at the window, at the harbor. He's identified her as the primary weakness, and he wanted to look at her directly and confirm it. He breathed. Which means he already knows what he's going to do. He's past the planning stage. "The boy," Vincent said. "The boy." Lucien was already moving to his coat. Get the detail doubled. Right now, before the school day ends. I want 2 people on Marcus at all times until I say otherwise, and I want the car positioned for extraction if anything changes. He pulled on his coat. And I want Cassian's location. He's at the South End apartment. Good. Keep him there. Lucien was at the door. I'm going to the library. To tell her? He stopped with his hand on the door frame. He thought about Elena at the reference desk, her hands steady, the way she'd said, I'll think about that last part on Saturday, with the particular tone of a woman who was being honest about the fact that she hadn't made up her mind yet. He thought about Marcus at the table with his headphones in. He thought about a bus in the rain and a woman who had looked at him, not at what he was, or what he carried, or what he could do to her, and had simply seen a person who hadn't eaten and acted accordingly. He thought about what it was going to look like when she understood the full scope of what he was. Not just the name, not just the abstract knowledge that he operated outside the law. The actual weight of it, the bodies it contained, the 3 decades of choices that had each made perfect sense in the moment, and now formed a structure she was going to have to look at clearly and decide what to do with. To tell her, he said. Yes. He walked out. In the South End apartment, Cassian's phone buzzed with a notification from the surveillance feed at Marcus's school. He looked at it. He looked at the timestamp. He picked up his coffee and drank it and thought about the meeting with Foster and the access codes to the school's camera system that would be in his possession by tomorrow morning. He thought about the woman at the library desk, the way she'd looked at the card with complete composure, the specific quality of her stillness that he'd assessed carefully because the stillness of people under pressure told you everything about what they were made of. She was made of something solid. That was, he had decided, going to make this harder for Lucien and easier for him, because a woman with that kind of composure was going to be very hard to break, and Lucien was going to watch her try not to break, and it was going to cost him in ways that no amount of composure could protect either of them from. He set down his coffee. He picked up his phone and called Foster. Move the timeline up, he said. Wednesday. I want the boy Wednesday after school. There was a brief pause on the line. That's fast. I know, Cassian said. That's the point. He hung up. He looked out the window at the South End street, at the ordinary Monday morning motion of the city that had no idea what was moving underneath it, and he felt the particular cold clarity of a man who is committed to a course of action and closed all the doors behind him. He didn't know that Lucien was already in a car heading to Roslindale. He didn't know that Vincent Rao was already on the phone doubling the detail on Marcus's school. And he didn't know, because no surveillance captures this, because no operational file contains it, what it meant that when Lucien Viscari walked through the door of the Roslindale branch at 11:23 on a Monday morning, and Elena Whitlock looked up from the reference desk and saw his face and understood from the quality of it that whatever came next was not going to be small, her first instinct was not to step back. It was to step forward and say quietly, so the children nearby wouldn't hear, "Tell me everything. Right now. All of it." And that was the moment. Not the sandwich, not the gala, not any of the Tuesdays and Thursdays at the table by the window. That was the moment when Lucien Viscari understood with complete and devastating clarity exactly what he stood to lose and felt, for the first time in 30 years, genuinely afraid. She said it quietly and she meant it completely, and Lucien looked at her for 3 seconds with the expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been offered the chance to set it down. And he wasn't sure yet whether setting it down was safe or whether it would simply crush whatever was beneath it. He said, "Not here." She looked at the children at the tables, at the 2 volunteers setting up the program materials, at Diane's empty chair behind the secondary desk. She made a decision with the speed of someone who had learned to make decisions quickly because hesitation was a luxury her life didn't extend. "Back room," she said. 5 minutes. Let me get the program started." She got the program started with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been running programs understaffed for 2 years, settled the 14 children with their materials and the 2 volunteers with their instructions, and then she walked to the back room and closed the door and turned around and looked at him. He told her. Not everything, not the full 31 years, not the specific weight of the specific choices, but the architecture of it, The organization, the scope, Cassian's name and what Cassian wanted, the bullet that had passed his left ear in the parking structure, the file his people had found that showed Cassian's inquiry into Marcus's school. He told it plainly, without softening, in the same direct register she'd asked for, because she had asked for all of it, and she was not a person who deserved to be managed. She listened without interrupting. She stood with her back against the shelving unit that held the surplus program materials, and she listened with her arms crossed, not defensively, but with the posture of someone who needs to hold themselves together in order to hear clearly. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the muffled sound of the program happening through the door. A child's laugh, someone reading aloud. "The man this morning," she said. "Thomas Feld. One of Cassian's people. Yes. He came to look at me." "Yes." She absorbed that. "And Marcus. He's already been identified." "Yes." "And the detail you have on him. They can hold if something happens? If Cassian moves before you can contain him?" "Yes." He said it without hesitation, because it was the truth and because she needed to hear it without hesitation. "I have 2 people on the school right now. I'm having it doubled before the end of the day." "Doubled." She said the word with a flat, careful neutrality that was doing a lot of work. "So 2 sets of your people, criminal people, Lucian, watching my 8-year-old nephew at his elementary school." "Yes." "Because another criminal, your underboss, has identified him as a potential hostage to use against you." "Yes." The room held that. "How did this happen?" she said. Not accusing, genuinely asking, in the tone of someone who needs to understand the sequence of failures, because understanding the sequence is the only thing that makes the present manageable. "How did I go from a bus in the rain to this?" "I made mistakes," he said. "I was careless with something that I should have been careful with. I let people see that you mattered to me before I had secured the situation." She heard the middle of that sentence. She let it sit. "When you say secured the situation, what does that mean in your world?" "It means Cassian no longer poses a threat." "How does that happen?" He held her gaze. "You know how." She looked at him for a long moment. She was doing something behind her eyes. He could see the processing of it, the filing and cataloging that was how she handled everything, the librarian's instinct to put things in their correct order so that the whole system made sense. "You need time," she said. "A few days, maybe less. And until then? Until then, I need you and Marcus to continue your routines as normally as possible. Cassian is watching for disruption. If you disappear, if you change your patterns, he reads it as information and he moves faster. I need him to think he controls the timeline." She uncrossed her arms. She turned and looked at the shelving unit, at the stacked boxes of program materials, at the handwritten labels she'd put on each one in her own careful writing. She was quiet for long enough that he started to hear the program through the door again, the reading voice, the small audience of children. "If anything happens to Marcus," she said to the shelving unit, "nothing will happen to Marcus." She turned back. Her face had the particular set of someone who has made a decision, not easily, not without cost, but completely. "You have until Friday," she said. "If this isn't contained by Friday, I'm taking Marcus and I'm leaving. I don't care where. I'll figure it out." "All right. And when this is over," she held his gaze, "we're going to have a very different conversation than the ones we've been having." "I know," he said. She went back to her program. Mas. The detail on Marcus was doubled by 2 o'clock Monday afternoon. Vincent had it in place before the school day ended, 2 additional people rotating the perimeter in a pattern designed to look like nothing, which they were good at because being good at looking like nothing was a professional requirement for the work they did. Lucien reviewed the arrangement by phone from his car in the library parking lot, where he sat for 40 minutes after Elena went back inside, looking at the building's facade with the expression of a man who is trying to memorize something in case he doesn't get to see it again. Then he drove to the seaport and called a meeting. The meeting was with 4 people, Vincent and 3 others who had been with Lucien long enough that the word loyalty meant something specific and structural, not sentimental. Their names were Garrett Park, who handled the Boston street operations, Mara Solis, who managed the financial architecture of the legitimate holdings, and a man called Eddie Brecht, who had no official title and whose function was the kind that didn't have official titles. They met in the private conference room on the 14th floor, no phones on the table. The door closed. "Cassian is moving against me," Lucian said. There was no preamble because these were not people who needed preamble. "I have the authorization trail from Draco Hines. I have surveillance confirmation that Cassian has been running his own intelligence operation inside our structure for at least 8 months. And I have confirmation that he has identified a civilian, someone completely outside the organization, as a leverage point." The room absorbed this. Garrett said, "The librarian." Lucien looked at him. "I've heard things," Garrett said. Not defensive, just honest. Not operational things, just people talk. "Then people need to stop talking," Lucien said. "And what I need from everyone at this table is a full accounting of any contact, any communication, any point of access that Cassian might have used to gather intelligence on our internal operations over the last year. Everything. I don't care how small it seems." What followed was 2 hours of careful, methodical excavation. The kind of organizational autopsy that revealed not corruption exactly, but the particular vulnerabilities of any structure that has been built over decades by human beings who trusted other human beings to the degree that their survival required. Cassian had been thorough. He had been thorough and patient in the way of a man who had spent 6 years learning every load-bearing wall of the structure he intended to bring down. By the end of the 2 hours, they had a clearer picture. Cassian had cultivated 3 informants inside the organization. Not people who considered themselves informants, but people who had shared the wrong information in what they'd believed were safe contexts. He had 2 external accounts that were not connected to any of Lucien's known financial structures, through which he'd been building his own operational fund for 18 months. And he had a relationship with 2 senior people on the South Shore, men who would be in the room at the quarterly meeting on the 15th, that was closer than Lucien had understood. "He's been building a replacement structure," Mara said. She was looking at the financial diagram she'd laid out on the table. "Not just planning a removal. He's been building the whole next iteration in parallel." "How long?" Lucien said. "At least 2 years. She tapped one of the account records. "This shell was opened 26 months ago." The room was quiet. 2 years. Cassian had been sitting across from him at quarterly reviews and operational meetings and the occasional dinner for 2 years, with this running underneath, and Lucien had not seen it. He had not seen it because he had been watching other things: the federal interest, the competition from the New York operations expanding northward, the logistics of 3 construction projects running simultaneously. He had been watching the horizon, and Cassian had been inside the walls. "The quarterly meeting," Eddie said. He was a man of few words, and he used them with the precision of someone who understood their value. "If we let it happen, we hand him the room." "We're not letting it happen," Lucien said. "Then we move first. Before Wednesday." "Before Wednesday," Lucien confirmed. "I need Cassian isolated. I need his external accounts frozen. Mara, that's yours. I need the 2 South Shore contacts to understand that their current arrangement is no longer viable. Garrett, that's yours. And I need it done quietly enough that Cassian doesn't know any of it is happening until it's already happened." "And Cassian himself?" Eddie said. Lucien looked at the table, at the financial diagrams and the surveillance records and the operational map that represented 2 years of patient betrayal by a man he had brought in, promoted, trusted with the infrastructure of everything he'd built. "Cassian himself," he said, "is mine." They went to work. Tuesday happened, and it was almost normal. He came in at 4. He sat at the table. He had the 3rd Caro book. Marcus came out of the back room at 4:30 and did his homework, and at one point asked Lucien, without looking up from his worksheet, how you spelled infrastructure. And Lucien told him, and Marcus wrote it down and said, "Thanks," in the tone of someone who considers this a purely transactional exchange, and returned to his worksheet. Elena watched all of this from the desk, and felt something in her chest that she couldn't name and didn't try to. At 5:45, when the library was nearly empty and Diane was closing up the periodicals section, Lucien brought his book back to the desk and set it down. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Wednesday," she said. "By end of day." It'll be done. She looked at him. She had been thinking, in the spaces between program prep and patron assistance and the ordinary machinery of Tuesday, about what done meant, and she had arrived at an understanding she would not have permitted herself to arrive at 3 months ago. The understanding that done was a word that meant different things in different worlds, and that she was standing at the border between two of them, and that she had not yet decided which side of the border her feet were on. "Be careful," she said. He looked briefly surprised, then not. "I will." He left. She finished her shift. She walked home with Marcus in the cold December dark, her cracked shoe letting in the wet, his hand in hers, and she thought about the structure of the last 3 months. The bus, the library, the gala, the Monday morning when he told her everything in the back room while 14 children did a reading program 12 feet away. And she thought about how completely ordinary it had looked from the outside, and how completely it had not been. Wednesday started wrong. Lucian knew it by 8 in the morning when Vincent called and said, with a specific quality of controlled alarm that Vincent reserved for situations that were moving faster than planned, "Cassian isn't at the South End apartment." "Where is he?" "We don't know. The surveillance lost him sometime after midnight. He went out through the building's service exit. There's no camera coverage there, which means he knew about our surveillance point." Lucien was already pulling on his coat. "He made us." "At some point, yes. We don't know when." The detail on Marcus. "Still in place. I checked 10 minutes ago." "Don't check. Go there yourself, right now. I want you physically at that school." He was out the door, phone at his ear, moving toward the elevator. "Get Garrett on the South Shore contacts. I don't care if it's 8 in the morning. Get him out of bed. And find Cassian. I want a location in 20 minutes. "Working on it." He was in the car in 4 minutes. He called Elena. She answered on the second ring. "It's early," she said, and her voice had the particular flatness of someone who was already awake and already knew the call was not going to be good news. "Change Marcus's routine today. Don't walk him to school, drive him, and stay with him until you see him go through the front door." A pause. "What happened?" "Cassian moved overnight. I don't have his location yet." Lucien. "The detail is in place. Vincent is going there personally. Marcus is safe right now. I need you to make sure he stays that way through the morning drop-off, and then I need you to go to the library and stay there and stay visible, and don't go anywhere with anyone you don't know." Another pause, shorter. "All right." Elena. "I heard you. I'll drive him." A sound. She was moving, getting her keys. "Call me when you have Cassian's location." "I will." He drove. The location came at 8:57, not from his surveillance team, but from an unexpected source. A call to Garrett's phone from one of the South Shore contacts, a man named Pruitt, who had apparently done the overnight math on his situation, and concluded that his current arrangement with Cassian was worth significantly less than his continued operational existence in Lucien's structure. Cassian was at a warehouse in Charlestown. He had been there since 1 in the morning. He was not alone. He had 6 people with him, which was fewer than Lucien would have expected, and which suggested that either the defection was faster than planned, or that 6 was all he'd been able to mobilize on short notice once he'd understood his timetable was collapsing. And he had Foster with him. Lucien got that detail from Pruitt's call, and he felt it land in his chest with a specific cold weight, because Foster's presence meant the operational plan was still active, which meant the Wednesday timeline for Marcus was still active, which meant Cassian hadn't abandoned the play, he'd simply relocated it. "How fast can you get to Charlestown?" Lucien said to Eddie. 20 minutes. "You have 15 minutes. He called Vincent. "Change of plans. I need you to stay on Marcus. Don't move from that school until I call you personally. Don't move for anyone else. Not Garrett, not me by text, only my voice on this phone." Understood. "If anything looks wrong, you take him inside and you call me." Understood. Lucien hung up. He redirected the car toward Charlestown. He was thinking about the warehouse layout, the 6 people, Foster's professional skill set, the specific problem of approaching a position held by a man who was now aware his timeline was compromised and who was therefore at his most dangerous. Men who believe they are losing make decisions that more confident men don't make. And those decisions are harder to anticipate because they're not rational. He was also thinking about Elena in the car with Marcus, the cracked shoe on the wet pedal, the 8-year-old in the passenger seat who didn't know that this particular Wednesday morning was different from the ones before it. He thought about her voice on the phone. All right. 2 words, no collapse, no panic, the voice of a woman who had decided what she was and was going to be that thing completely regardless of circumstances. He thought about the moment in the back room when she'd turned away from him to look at the shelving unit, and he'd understood, watching her back, that she was not looking for someone to rescue her. She was buying herself the 30 seconds she needed to put what he'd told her into the correct order so she could decide what to do with it. He was 4 minutes from Charlestown when Vincent called back. The quality of Vincent's voice in those first 2 words, just Lucienne and a breath, was the quality that Lucienne had spent 31 years learning to read, and what he read in it was the specific register of a man who is reporting a failure, and the adrenaline that hit him was the cleanest and most primitive thing he had felt in decades, because it had nothing to do with power or money or positioning, and everything to do with an 8-year-old boy and a woman who had told him until Friday. Talk, Lucian said. There's a second team, Vincent said. We missed a second team. They came from the north side of the block, 2 vehicles. They were in place before I got here. I have eyes on the school door right now, and Marcus is already inside. He's safe, but Vincent's voice tightened. Foster isn't in Charlestown. The Charlestown location was misdirection. Pruitt gave you bad information. Foster is here. He was here before I arrived, and I have 2 of Cassian's people in a vehicle on the east side of the school that I cannot move on without. Don't move, Lucian said. Do not engage. Where's my detail? Your detail has been neutralized. Non-fatal. They're restrained in the parking structure behind the school. Cassian's people moved on them at 6:30 this morning. The car was doing 70 in a 40 zone, and Lucien did not notice. Marcus is inside the building. Inside the building, yes. But Foster is somewhere on this block, and I have 2 of Cassian's vehicles, and I am 1 person, and I cannot... I'm 12 minutes out. Lucien, they're going to move before 12 minutes. He was already dialing with his other hand. He hit Garrett, who picked up in 1 ring. Charlestown was misdirection. I need everyone to Marcus's school right now. I need them there in 10 minutes. That's not possible in 8 minutes. Whatever you have, go. He dropped the phone on the seat. He was running through the scenario at a speed that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with the 3 decades of pattern recognition that his particular life had required, and what the pattern recognition was telling him was that Cassian had done this correctly. The misdirection, the second team, the early neutralization of the detail, the choice to hold Foster in reserve. He had done it correctly and with resources that Lucien had underestimated, and the result was that Marcus was inside a school building with Foster somewhere on the perimeter and Vincent alone on the ground. He was also thinking, with the part of his mind that never stopped working regardless of what the rest of it was doing, about Elena. About whether Cassian had a play on Elena simultaneously or sequentially. About the library. About what happened if Cassian's goal was not actually Marcus, but the moment when Lucien had to choose. He called Elena. She answered immediately. I dropped him off. He's inside. I know. Listen to me carefully. Is there anyone outside the library right now? Any vehicle you don't recognize? Anyone on the street who... There's a man across the street. Her voice was flat and controlled, and he heard, underneath the control, the thing that was happening to her breathing. He's been there since I opened. Dark coat. He's not looking at his phone. He's looking at the library. Lock the front door, Lucien said. Silence. 1 second. Lucien, I have patrons inside. Elena, lock the front door and call the police and tell them there is a suspicious individual casing the building. Do it now. Stay on the line with them, not with me. Do you understand? Yes. Her breath. Yes, what's happening with Marcus? I'm handling Marcus. Lock the door. Lucien, lock the door. The line went quiet, and then he heard, very faintly, the sound of a deadbolt engaging, and then she was gone. Because she was calling the police, and he needed her to be calling the police, and he needed to be 2 places at once, and he was not. which was the thing that no amount of operational experience or 30 years of power could correct for, because he was one person in one car and the two things he could not lose were in two different places, and Cassian had understood that with perfect, devastating accuracy. He was 6 minutes from the school, Vincent's voice in his ear again. East vehicle is moving. Position? Pulling to the front of the building. They're not stopping. They're going to the side entrance. The side entrance has a buzzer system. Foster has the code, Vincent said, and his voice had the quality of a man delivering the worst piece of information in the conversation. He has the school's access codes. Lucien, he has the codes. The world in the car went absolutely silent for approximately 2 seconds, which was the time it took for Lucien Vescari to understand that the thing he had told Elena would not happen was in the process of happening, and that the gap between his assurance in this moment was the gap between the man he had been trying to be for 3 months and the man he actually was, and that gap was now the specific dimension of everything he stood to lose. 6 minutes. The side entrance of an elementary school in Boston on a Wednesday morning with a man named Foster who had the access codes and 2 vehicles of Cassian's people, and a timeline that had been planned for weeks while Lucien had been sitting at a table by a library window reading Robert Caro and thinking that patience was enough. He pressed the accelerator to the floor and ran a red light and then another, and the city moved around the car in streaks of gray and wet pavement, and he was thinking only one thing, with the totality of a man who has finally understood the exact weight of what he's been carrying without knowing it, which was the boy's name. Marcus. 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 Repeated with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that this is the thing that matters and everything else is. He ran the third red light at the intersection of Rutherford and Austin, and the car went through the cross-traffic gap with 2 inches to spare on the left side, and he didn't look in the mirror because there was nothing behind him that mattered. 5 minutes. Vincent in his ear. Foster is at the side entrance. He's using a keypad. Lucien, I'm going to have to move. Don't move yet. If he gets inside that building, how many with Foster at the side entrance? 2. The other vehicle is still on the east side, but that's 2 more. I'm counting 4 total plus Foster. Where are you positioned? Northwest corner of the parking structure. I have a sightline on the side entrance, but not the east vehicle. The east vehicle is containment. They're there to intercept if anyone tries to bring Marcus out the east side. Lucien was running the geometry in his head, the school building's layout from the satellite image he'd studied when he first put the detail in place. The specific problem of a man with building access codes and 3 minutes of uncontested time inside an elementary school. Foster's goal is to take Marcus out the way he came in. The east vehicle catches anyone who tries to run the other direction. They're boxing the building. So they need Foster inside for extraction. Yes, which means if Foster doesn't get inside, the play fails. He was past the bridge. The school was 4 minutes out, maybe 3.5 if the next 2 lights were clear. Vincent, the keypad. What's Foster doing right now? Entering the code. Wait. A pause. The door didn't open. Lucien's hands tightened on the wheel. He's entering it again. Vincent's voice had changed, a different frequency. Lucien, the door isn't opening. Someone changed the codes. It came to him all at once. Not his people, not Vincent, but the school itself. The standard security protocol that any elementary school with a functioning administration would have, which was that access codes rotated on a schedule. What day does that school rotate their access codes? A different voice entered the line. Garrett, now in the network, 3 vehicles inbound from different directions. First and third Wednesday of every month, Garrett said. I'm looking at the school's security documentation right now. Code rotation is automated, midnight. First and third Wednesday. Today was the 3rd Wednesday of December. Cashin's people had planned this for last Wednesday. They'd moved the timeline up by a week when Lucien had appeared to be closing in, and in doing so, they'd moved it into a code rotation date that Foster's pre-obtained codes couldn't accommodate. He can't get in, Lucien said. He's on the phone now, Vincent said. He's making a call. He's not happy. He's calling Cassian. He's going to abort, or he's going to find another way in. 2 minutes out. Vincent, the moment Foster steps back from that entrance, he's going to regroup with the east vehicle. They'll either abort fully, or they'll wait for school dismissal and take Marcus in the open. Don't let those two vehicles meet up. I'm one person. I'm 90 seconds out. Hold. He came off the last turn onto the school street at a speed that put two wheels briefly off the pavement, and he didn't care. He registered it as information and corrected. And then the school building was in front of him. Brick facade, chain link fence, the parking structure on his left, and he could see the side entrance, Foster standing back from the keypad now with his phone pressed to his ear, and two men flanking him with the specific posture of people who are reassessing. He stopped the car in the middle of the street. He got out. Foster saw him. There was a single moment, a held breath between two people across 40 feet of cold December pavement. And then Foster made the calculation that Lucien could see him making, the kind of calculation that a professional makes when the variables have shifted and he needs to decide whether the current situation is recoverable or whether it's a controlled withdrawal. Foster chose withdrawal. He said something to his two men and they moved, not running but moving fast, back toward the east side of the building where the second vehicle was. Lucien went after them at a run, pulling out his phone, and hit Vincent's number. "They're coming to your side. East vehicle. I need you on the east vehicle now." He rounded the corner of the building. Vincent had the east vehicle blocked with his own car, positioned sideways across the narrow service lane in a move that had crumpled the front quarter panel and would cost someone an insurance conversation. And he was standing beside it with the particular expression of a man who is committed to a course of action and is seeing it through regardless of personal comfort. Foster's two men from the side entrance came around the corner and stopped short when they saw the blocked lane. Four of Cassian's people in the service lane. Vincent. Lucien coming in from the west corner. Foster was not among them. Lucien registered that immediately. Foster had split off, was not with the four men, had used the moment of confrontation to go somewhere else. "Where's Foster?" he said. One of the four men, thick, mid-40s, not someone Lucien recognized, which meant Cassian had brought in outside muscle, which meant the operation was bigger than Pruitt's misdirection had suggested, said nothing. Just looked at him with the flat professional assessment of someone doing a threat calculation. Garrett's vehicles came in from both ends of the service lane simultaneously, two cars sealing the east and west openings, and the four men in the lane understood the math in about 2 seconds and made the correct decision, which was to put their hands up. "Foster," Lucien said again to the thick man. Nothing. Lucien was already moving back around the building's perimeter. His phone was ringing, Vincent calling back, and he answered without breaking stride. "Foster isn't with them." "I see him," Vincent said. "He's at the front entrance. He's talking to someone through the intercom." Front entrance. The main intercom, where parents buzzed in and were visually confirmed by the front office before the door was released. Where a man in a plain coat could stand and speak calmly and claim to be a parent with an emergency, and where a school administrator on a Wednesday morning might, under the right kind of social pressure, make the wrong decision. Lucien was running. He came around the front of the building and saw Foster at the intercom panel, his back to Lucien, speaking in the low, controlled tone of a man who has done this kind of thing before. The performance of normalcy under pressure, the voice that sounds like a concerned parent and not like what he was. Lucien hit him from behind with enough force that Foster's shoulder connected with the intercom panel, and the panel cracked. And Foster turned, fast, faster than Lucien had fully anticipated, and caught Lucien across the left cheekbone with his elbow on the turn. The pain was immediate and white, and Lucien took it and drove his weight forward anyway, because pain was information, and information was not a reason to stop. They went down onto the school's front walkway together, both of them, and it was ugly and close and nothing like the choreographed violence that movies made of these moments. It was breath and cold concrete and the specific sound of two middle-aged men in good coats fighting with the desperate efficiency of people who understand that losing has consequences. Foster was strong and technical, and he fought with the economy of someone trained to end things quickly. Lucien fought with 30 years of survival and the very specific knowledge of exactly what Foster had been on his way to do. He got Foster's right arm up behind him at an angle that ended the encounter, not cleanly, not without cost to his own ribs, and he held it there with his knee in the small of Foster's back and his face 6 inches from the walkway, breathing through his mouth. The front door of the school opened. A woman, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the specific expression of a school administrator who has seen the entire thing through the intercom camera and has made several simultaneous phone calls, looked down at the two men on her front walkway. "The police are coming," she said. "Good," Lucien said. He was breathing hard. His cheekbone was going to be a problem in a few hours. "They should come." The police came in 4 minutes and processed the scene with the controlled efficiency of people who understood that something significant had happened and were not yet sure exactly what shape it was. Garrett's people had the 4 men from the service lane secured, which created a brief jurisdictional conversation that the arriving officers navigated with the resigned professionalism of Boston police encountering a situation that was above their immediate pay grade. Lucien gave his name to the first officer. He watched the officer's face do the thing faces did when that name registered and then composed itself back into professional neutrality. He answered the questions that were asked and did not answer the ones that weren't, and provided his attorney's number when the conversation reached the point at which providing his attorney's number was the correct move. Marcus was inside the building, unharmed, in his classroom, where he had been since Elena had walked him through the front door 90 minutes ago. The school was informed that the situation on the perimeter was contained. They kept the students inside for an additional 40 minutes as a precaution, which meant Marcus's third-period class watched 2 extra episodes of a documentary about ocean currents, and Marcus, who liked ocean currents, did not consider this a hardship. Lucien sat on the front steps of the school with a paper towel pressed to his cheekbone and waited. His phone had 17 missed calls. He looked through them in order of priority and called 3 back and did not call the other 14, and then he called Elena. "Marcus is safe," he said before she could speak. "He's in his classroom. The situation at the school is contained." A sound on the line that was not a word. "Elena, I'm here." Her voice was wrong in a specific way. Not frightened. The fear had been and gone. This was the voice of someone coming down from a very high place and finding the ground different from how they remembered it. "I'm here. Is he? Can I get to him?" "The police are here. They'll want to talk to you. You should come." "I'm coming." He heard her moving, keys, the library door. The man across the street from the library. When the police came, he ran. My people picked him up 2 blocks away. He moved the paper towel and looked at it and put it back. "He's a small piece. He's not the piece that matters." "Cassian," she said. "Cassian," he confirmed. A pause. "Where is he?" "I don't have him yet." Another pause, different quality. "You need to go get him." "Yes." "Then go." She said it plainly, without drama. "I'm going to get Marcus. You go do what you need to do." He looked at the street in front of the school, at the police vehicles, at the ordinary Wednesday morning of the neighborhood moving around the perimeter of the situation with the determined curiosity of people who have learned that certain things in this city are better not looked at directly. "I'll call you when it's done." "Lucien." Her voice had changed again, and he held very still for what came next. "Come back from it. Whatever you have to do, come back from it." He breathed. "I will," he said. Cassian was not at the South End apartment. He was not at any of his known locations, which Lucien's people had covered within 20 minutes of the school situation resolving. He had gone to ground somewhere in the city with the pragmatic competence of a man who had planned for the possibility that the operation failed and had arranged accordingly. It took until 2 in the afternoon to find him. The location came from Mara, who had spent the morning pulling every financial thread attached to Cassian's independent accounts, and had found, at the end of one of them, a commercial property in East Boston, a warehouse space registered to a shell company that had no visible connection to anything Cassian had ever touched, which was precisely why it was the right place to look, because the best hiding places are the ones that have been scrubbed so thoroughly they feel sterile. Lucien went with Eddie and 2 others. He left Garrett coordinating the cleanup at the school. He did not bring a large team because a large team was noise, and noise was the wrong approach for a situation that required precision and a specific kind of finality. The East Boston warehouse was on a narrow street 1 block from the waterfront, the kind of building that had been a light industrial space in a previous decade and had never quite converted to anything else, sitting in the ambiguous middle ground between what the neighborhood had been and what it was trying to become. The loading dock door on the south face was the accessible entry. Lucien went through it. Cassian was inside. He was not alone. He had two men with him, neither of whom were Foster, which meant Foster was either in police custody or had made his own exit from the situation. The two men assessed the arrival at the loading dock and made the calculation that professional people make when the operational context has shifted conclusively and they step back. Not surrender exactly, just the absence of continued engagement. Cassian stood in the center of the warehouse floor with his hands loose at his sides and looked at Lucien coming toward him with the expression of a man who has been running the scenarios and has arrived at the one he's in now and is deciding how to occupy it. He was not afraid. Lucien could see that clearly. He was many things: calculating, resigned in a specific partial way, resolved, but not afraid. And that told Lucien something about the kind of man he was dealing with, which was the kind that had made its peace with certain outcomes a long time ago. "You were late by 8 minutes, Cassian said. "If the code hadn't rotated, but it did." "Yes." Cassian looked at the floor briefly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or might have been something else. "The code rotated. Bad timing." "Or good timing," Lucien said, "depending on which side you're standing on." Cassian looked at him. "How many of my people did you take today?" "All of them." "Foster." "In custody." A nod. "The South Shore contacts." "No longer your contacts." Another nod, slower. He was processing the accounting of it, the scope of what had failed, and he was doing it with the particular composure of a man who had invested 2 years in a plan and was watching the full return on that investment arrive all at once. "You move faster than I expected," he said, "after you found the Charlestown location." "Pruitt." "Yes. I thought Pruitt was more committed." Cassian's jaw tightened briefly. "I misread him." "You misread a few things," Lucien said. "I misread her." He said it without hesitation, directly. "I thought she was a vulnerability. I thought a man who cared about something soft had introduced a weakness I could work with." He paused. "But she's not soft." "No," Lucien said. "She's not. And you're not the same man you were a year ago." Cassian said it the way you say a thing that has been costing you something, that you've been carrying as analysis for a long time and are finally setting down. "That was the thing I actually misread. I was planning against the old version of you, the one who didn't have anything he couldn't afford to lose." He looked at Lucien with the direct, undeflected attention of someone who has arrived at honesty because there's nothing left to protect. "What happened on that bus?" "What she did." "That's not your business, Lucien," Yen said. "No," Cassian agreed simply. "It's not." The warehouse was quiet. The two men near the far wall were not moving. Eddie was behind Lucien and to his left, present but not pressing the situation. Outside, the waterfront was gray and the gulls were making their sounds over the channel, and the city was doing what cities do, which is continue, regardless. "I'm not going to fight you," Cassian said. "If that's what you're waiting to see." "I know you're not. What happens now is whatever you decide it is." He said it without theater, without plea. "You know that." Lucien looked at him for a long moment. He thought about 31 years, about the specific weight of a life built on decisions like the one he was standing inside of right now, and about what those decisions had made of him, and about a woman who had said come back from it on the phone in a way that meant something specific, that was asking for something specific, not abstention from the work of this moment, but the quality of the man who returned from it. He thought about Marcus in a classroom watching a documentary about ocean currents, unharmed, unaware, entirely intact. He thought about what it cost. "You're done," Lucien said. "Everything you built inside my structure. Done. The accounts, the South Shore relationships, all of it. And you're going to spend the next several years in a very uncomfortable federal conversation because I'm going to make sure the right people have the right documentation, and they're going to have questions that are going to take a very long time to answer." Cassian's eyes changed slightly. That he hadn't anticipated. "You're not—" He stopped. "No," Lucien said. I'm not. He breathed. Not because you deserve the alternative, but because I'm trying to be a different kind of man, and that requires making different kinds of decisions, and this is one of them. He turned and walked back to the loading dock. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. You went after an 8-year-old, he said. Whatever happens to you from here, you did that. Live with it. He walked out into the cold East Boston afternoon and called Vincent and gave him the address and told him to make the calls that needed to be made. And then he stood on the narrow street by the waterfront with his hands in his coat pockets and his cheekbone throbbing and the late afternoon light going flat over the channel. He called Elena. She answered in one ring, and in the background he could hear Marcus talking to someone, the specific animated register of a child recounting something, and underneath that the soft ambient sound of the library. And he stood on that East Boston street and listened to those sounds for a moment before she said anything. "It's done?" she said. "It's done." A pause. He heard her breathe. "Are you hurt?" "Some. Nothing permanent?" "Marcus told me about the Ocean Current documentary," she said. "He wants to know if we can get books about it." A small sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "He doesn't know anything else happened today. He thinks it was a plumbing emergency." "Good." "Lucienne." Her voice changed, dropped, went to the register that meant she was saying something she'd been holding. "I need some time after this. I have to think about what this looks like, what it means. For Marcus, for me." She paused. "I need you to understand that." "I understand that," he said. "I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not closing a door. I need to see where I'm standing before I can tell you what's on the other side of it." He looked at the channel, at the gray water moving. "I'll wait," he said. "I know." Another pause. "Come to the library Tuesday, if you want. Bring the book back." A breath. "We'll see where we are." The line stayed open for a few seconds after that, not because either of them had more to say, but because neither of them was ready to be the one to end it. And finally she did, quietly, and the line went still. He stood on the street for another minute. Then he put his phone in his coat pocket and turned away from the waterfront and walked to the car. Tuesday, he thought. He would bring the book back on Tuesday, and they would see where they were. And that was not a guarantee of anything. It was not a resolution or a promise or a door that had been opened. It was simply the next thing. And after 31 years of building a life that required certainty and control and the elimination of variables, the simple uncertainty of it was the most honest thing he had felt in a very long time. He got in the car. The city moved around him in its ordinary way, the late December afternoon already going dark at the edges, the lights of the buildings coming on one by one along the waterfront, and somewhere across the city in a library that was too cold in winter and too hot in summer, and had a ceiling with a water stain that was still spreading, a woman was putting books back on the shelves, and an 8-year-old was asking about ocean currents, and the ordinary machinery of the world was grinding on, and Lucien Vescari drove toward it with the particular intentionality of a man who has finally understood the difference between what he had built and what he actually. The cheekbone took 3 weeks to stop hurting. He didn't see a doctor for the first 4 days, which Vincent told him was both predictable and idiotic, and he agreed with both assessments and did nothing about either of them until the swelling had colored the left side of his face in the specific purpling that made his morning mirror something he dealt with quickly and moved on from. On the 5th day, he saw a doctor who was discreet and competent and told him nothing was fractured, which he'd already suspected, and sent him home with anti-inflammatory medication and a recommendation to apply ice that he followed for approximately 2 days before he stopped. The federal conversation happened faster than he'd expected. He had given Vincent the documentation on Cashin's independent accounts, the authorization trail from Draco Hines, and the complete operational record of the 26 months of parallel structure building, and Vincent had delivered it through the correct channel. A specific attorney whose relationship with a specific federal prosecutor was the kind of relationship that had been cultivated carefully over many years for exactly this kind of eventual use. The prosecutor had questions. There were several conversations that took place in rooms with no recording equipment and accomplished the specific kind of quiet rearrangement that the American legal system permitted in certain circumstances when the alternative was more expensive for everyone involved. Cassian was arrested on a Thursday morning in early January. The charges covered financial fraud, conspiracy, and several other categories that the prosecutor had found in the documentation with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had been looking for exactly this material for longer than they'd expected to have to look. It would take years to resolve. That was fine. Years was what Cassian had now, and he would spend them in the specific accounting that came from having built something carefully and then watched it used against him. Foster cooperated. That was the word the prosecutor used. Cooperated. And it meant what it always meant, which was that Foster had done the math on his situation and had arrived at the conclusion that the math favored a different set of choices than the ones that had brought him to the east side of an elementary school on a Wednesday morning with building access codes that didn't work. What Foster said in his cooperation produced additional names and additional documentation and made the federal case considerably more comprehensive than it would otherwise have been. And if Cassian experienced any particular feeling about that, he experienced it privately. Lucien's own position in all of this was the complicated and legally imprecise thing it had always been, occupying the specific gray zone that 31 years of careful management had constructed for it. The federal file that had been technically active in the Boston field office was reviewed and updated and then set aside again, because the prosecutor understood, in the way of people who deal in practical outcomes, that the current situation had produced more actionable result than 3 years of direct investigation had, and there was a logic to the arrangement that superseded the more satisfying but less productive alternative. None of this felt like victory. That was the thing he hadn't expected, or perhaps had expected but had not fully prepared for, that the resolution of the thing would arrive not as relief, but as a kind of flatness, the emotional equivalent of the sound a room makes after everyone has left it. He had dismantled the immediate threat and handed Cassian to the machinery of consequence and kept Marcus safe and come back from it the way Elena had asked him to, and the result was not triumph. It was quiet. And inside the quiet was the full weight of everything the last 31 years had actually cost, without the noise of operational urgency to keep it at a manageable distance. He didn't go to the library on Tuesday. He sent a text. Not ready yet. Next week. She replied after 6 hours. Okay. One word, and it was enough. It was what he needed, which was the confirmation that the door she'd said she wasn't closing was still where she'd left it. He spent the week doing something he had not done in a sustained way in 3 decades, which was thinking clearly about the structure of the life he had built and what exactly he was going to do with what remained of it. Not the emotional version of this, not guilt or regret as an experience, but as a map, the kind of clear-eyed accounting that he had always applied to operational problems and had never before now applied to himself. The legitimate holdings were real. That had always been true. The construction company, the commercial real estate, the restaurant groups, the private equity fund. They employed people. They generated value. They were not innocent, because nothing that had been built from the foundation he'd built from could be entirely innocent, but they were real, and they were the part of the structure that could survive what came next. The other parts were different. He met with Mara on a Thursday, and with 2 attorneys on a Friday, and with a financial restructuring consultant the following Monday, and the conversations were long and specific and covered ground that produced in Mara, who had seen many things in her 11 years working for him, an expression he hadn't seen from her before, which was something between wariness and a very carefully contained hope. "How much are we talking?" she said, on the Thursday. "All of it," he said. "Everything that can be converted." She looked at her notes. She looked at him. "That's a significant, I know what it is." Timeline. As fast as it can be done cleanly. He looked out the window. The January harbor was steel-colored and flat. Some of it will take time. Some of the relationships will need to be wound down over months. I understand that. But I want a clear direction established immediately, and I want the process documented from the start. Why documented? He thought about the question. He thought about a woman who had asked him to come back from it, and what coming back meant in practice, not in the abstract, but in the concrete daily reality of a life that was going to have to account for itself. Because I want it to be real, he said. Not a story I tell. A record. Mara wrote something in her notebook. She closed it. All right, she said. And that was all she said, which was enough. Itztim. He went to the library on the second Tuesday of January. He walked in at 4 o'clock with the Caro book under his arm. The third one. The one he hadn't finished because December had not been a good reading month. And the bell above the door made its small sound, and he stepped inside. The library was in its after-school configuration. Children at tables, the low, constant murmur of young voices, the smell of old paper, and the radiator heat that the building never distributed quite evenly. Diane was at the secondary desk. Elena was at the main desk helping a teenager with something on the computer, turned slightly away from the door. Marcus saw him first. He was at the table nearest the window, a stack of books beside him, and he looked up when the door opened with the instinctive alertness of a child who has his aunt's habit of cataloging entrances. And when he saw Lucienne, he did not wave or call out. He just looked, with the serious, assessing gravity that was entirely his own, and then he went back to his book. Elena turned from the teenager's computer. She looked at him. The look lasted approximately 2 seconds and covered a distance that was not measurable in feet. And then she said something to the teenager and straightened, and he walked to the desk. He put the book on the counter. She looked at it and then at his face, at the left cheekbone, which was no longer swollen but had left a faint discoloration that would take another week or two to finish resolving. You should have iced it longer, she said. I know. Does it still hurt? Some, less than last week. She picked up the book and scanned it, and the computer made its small confirmation sound. She didn't hand it back immediately. She held it, looking at the spine, and he waited because he had told her he would wait, and he was doing that. I've been thinking, she said. I know. About what you are, what your life is. She set the book down on the counter between them. About Marcus. About what it means for him to know you, to be in proximity to you. Those are the right things to think about, he said. She looked at him directly. Her face had the particular quality he had come to associate with her most honest moments. No performance in it, nothing managed or softened, just the thing itself. Are you different? She said. Or are you just in a quieter period? The question was not unkind. It was precise, which was what she was, and it deserved precision back. I don't know yet, he said. I know what I'm doing, the decisions I've made and what they're going to require. But whether that makes me different or just a man who made different decisions, he paused. I think that takes time to know. That's an honest answer. I'm trying to be honest with you, even when it's not the answer that helps me. She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, Diane was helping someone with a hold request, and Marcus had abandoned his book and was watching them from his table with the focused attention of a child who understands that something adult is happening and is trying to read it accurately. I need you to not be in Marcus's life in the way you have been, she said. Not yet. Not while I'm figuring this out. He's attached to you. He won't say that. He wouldn't say that, but he is. And if this goes somewhere I can't navigate, if I look at all of it and decide I can't, she stopped. I can't let him lose another person. The sentence arrived with the full weight of what it contained, which was not just the 8-year-old at the table, but the sister who had died and the husband who had left, and all the loss that Elena Whitlock had been building her life around since she'd given up Columbia and come home and decided that building around loss was not the same as being defined by it. I understand, he said. I'm not saying never. I'm saying I understand, he said again quietly. You're protecting him. That's what you do. Her jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, but with the effort of holding something that was asking to be set down. I'm trying to figure out if there's a version of this that doesn't eventually hurt him, she said, and I don't know yet. I genuinely don't know. Neither do I, Lucian said. That's the honest answer to that one, too. She picked up the Caro book and held it for a moment, and then she held it out to him. Keep it, she said. You haven't finished it. He took it. Their hands didn't touch in the transfer, but it was close, and he was aware of the distance in the specific way of a man who has learned to pay attention to distances. "Come back when you've finished it," she said. "We'll talk about it." He nodded. He turned toward the door. He was nearly there when Marcus's voice came from the table, not loud, just clear. "You're leaving?" Lucian stopped. He turned. Marcus was looking at him with the direct, unceremonious attention of a child who wants an answer and is not yet old enough to have learned to disguise the wanting. "For now," Lucian said. Marcus considered that. "Will you come back?" "I'll come back." Marcus looked at him for another moment, doing whatever calculation 8-year-olds do when they are assessing the reliability of an adult's word, and then he nodded once, with the gravity of someone who has logged the information and is reserving further judgment, and went back to his book. Lucian went out into the January cold. The months that followed were the strangest of his life, and they were strange because they were quiet, and the quiet was not the quiet of a man who had nothing happening, but the quiet of a man who was doing something very slowly and very deliberately, and measuring his progress not by speed, but by the quality of what he was building. The restructuring took the shape Mara had outlined. It was slow in some places and faster in others, and it was never clean in the way that clean things are clean, because nothing built from an imperfect foundation is ever clean. It just becomes gradually more honest about the nature of its own construction. There were conversations that were difficult and outcomes that cost him in ways that were both financial and otherwise, and he had the conversations and paid the costs and documented everything and kept going. He funded the Children's Literacy Foundation in March. He did it anonymously, through a structure that Mara built with the specific care of someone who understood what anonymity required and why it mattered in this particular case. The foundation was not small. It was capitalized at a level that would sustain a meaningful program for a decade without additional fundraising. And it was directed specifically toward library branches in underserved neighborhoods in Boston and the surrounding cities, with a particular emphasis on after-school reading programs, Storytime infrastructure, and the kind of capital improvements that public library budgets had been failing to cover for years. The Roslindale branch received a renovation grant in April. Elena handled the notification from the foundation with the professional composure of a librarian managing an unexpected institutional gift, which was to say she called the foundation's administrative contact and asked every relevant question about reporting requirements and fund usage restrictions, and did not, as far as anyone at the library knew, have any information about the source beyond the foundation's registered name. She figured it out in 2 days. She didn't call him. She sent a text. "The water stain is getting fixed. The ceiling contractor starts Monday." "I know this is you," he replied. "The foundation is independent. I have no operational role." A pause. Then, "Lucien." "Yes. Thank you." He sat with that for a long time. The library's spring celebration was on a Saturday in late April, the kind of event that happened every year and was beloved specifically because of its lack of ambition. A morning of reading programs and donated cookies, and a local storyteller who came every year and whose repertoire had not significantly changed in a decade, which the children who came every year considered a feature rather than a flaw. Elena had been up since 6 preparing for it, which Marcus considered unreasonable and said so, and she ignored him and made them both oatmeal and drove to the library in the Honda Civic that now had a working registration and a repaired left tail light and still had the crack in the left shoe's sole, because some things got fixed and some things got lived with. By 9:30, the children's section was full in the warm, chaotic way of children who are somewhere they want to be, and the golden retriever from the Marchetti family was in his established corner with his established expression of tolerant dignity, and Diane was managing the cookie table with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned that unsupervised children in baked goods was a specific kind of logistical challenge, and the storyteller was setting up in the corner with his stool and his collection of books, and his complete lack of awareness that his material was dated, which was, as always, entirely beside the point. Elena was at the desk at 10:15 when the bell above the door made its sound. She was helping a child find a specific book about dolphins, and she looked up with the automatic awareness of someone who always notes entrances, and Lucien Vescari walked into the Roslindale branch of the Boston Public Library on a Saturday morning in April in a plain dark jacket with the Caro book under his arm, and he looked around the room in his way, the careful, unhurried inventory of someone orienting himself. And then he found her face and stopped. She finished helping the child with the dolphin book. She walked the book to its shelf and came back to the desk. She looked at the book under his arm. "You finished it," she said. "2 weeks ago," he said. "I've been waiting for a reasonable moment to return it. And this is a reasonable moment." "You have cookies," he said. That seemed promising. She took the book from him and scanned it. The computer made it sound. She set it on the returns cart. She looked at him. He looked at her. The library moved around them in its Saturday morning way. Children's voices, the retriever's nails on the floor, Diane saying something to someone about chocolate chip versus snickerdoodle. "How long do you have today?" she said. "As long as you need." She picked up 2 cookies from the plate on the desk, the kind of plate that appeared at library events without clear attribution, assembled by the community effort of people who believed in the institution enough to bring cookies to it on Saturday mornings, and held one out to him. He took it. They stood on their respective sides of the desk eating cookies, which was not a dramatic moment, and was not designed to be, and which was nonetheless the thing she had been thinking about for 4 months. Not the grand version, not the version that resolved everything cleanly, but the actual version, the one that looked like 2 people eating cookies in a library on a Saturday morning, while children argued about dolphins and a golden retriever maintained his post in the corner. "The foundation," she said. "Yes. It's real. It's not going away. No. It's independent, structured to outlast any single donor's involvement. I talked to the director. She said the Boston branches are getting literacy coordinators, actual staff, not volunteers." Elena looked at the returns cart. "That changes what these places can do. Over years, that changes a lot." "I know," he said. "That's the point." She looked at him. At the left cheekbone, fully healed now, no trace of December left in it. At the face she'd been looking at since October, which she now understood with a clarity she hadn't had before. Not completely, not without remainder, but honestly, which was the form of understanding she'd always valued over the cleaner but less true alternatives. "Marcus asked about you last week," she said. "What did he ask?" "He asked if you were coming to the spring celebration." She paused. "I told him I didn't know." Lucien looked at the children's section, at the storyteller beginning his setup, at the particular Saturday morning energy of the room. He looked at Marcus, who was at his usual table with headphones in, doing something on a worksheet with the focused indifference of a child who has decided to complete his homework before the celebration fully absorbs him, which was a Marcus-specific quality that still managed to surprise and move Elena even after 2 years of raising him. "Can I stay?" Lucien said. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Lucien. She thought about 4 months of thinking, of lying awake and going through it from every angle she could find, of asking herself the question she'd asked him that Tuesday in January. Are you different, or are you just in a quieter period? And testing the answer against everything she'd seen in the months since. She thought about a bus in the rain, about the person she'd been on that bus, the one who had looked at a stranger and seen a person who hadn't eaten and done the small and obvious and uncomplicated thing. She thought about how she had not known, when she did it, that it was the beginning of anything. She thought about how the most important things rarely announce themselves. "Yes," she said. "You can stay." Something moved in his face that was not quite the smile, but was closer to it than she'd seen before. And she turned and went back to the desk because there were 12 more children arriving in the next 20 minutes, and the storyteller needed his introduction, and the cookie situation at Diane's table had developed a complexity that required supervisory attention. Lucien stayed. He sat, not at the table by the window where he'd always sat, but at the table nearest the children's section, the one Marcus had claimed on the basis of proximity to the action, and Marcus looked up when he sat down and regarded him with the brief, assessing look, and then said without ceremony, "She's going to read the dolphin one first. It's the best one." "I'll take your word for it," Lucien said. "You should," Marcus said, and went back to his worksheet. The storyteller began. The children assembled with the particular quality of Saturday morning children, loose, present, ready to be interested. And the golden retriever resettled himself, and Diane came away from the cookie table and stood near the back with the expression of someone who had seen this event many times and had never once stopped being glad to be here for it. Elena introduced the storyteller and then came to stand near the side wall where she could see the whole room, the whole assembled particular morning of it. And Lucien was at the table and Marcus was beside him, and the storyteller was doing the opening of a story about a library that had very opinionated books, and the children were already leaning forward, already caught. She looked at the ceiling, at the plastered and painted repair where the water stain had been, the contractor's work smooth and clean, the old mark of damage now indistinguishable from the surrounding surface. You could not tell, looking at it, that it had ever been there. She looked back at the room. There was a specific quality to what she felt, standing at the side wall of the Roslindale branch on a Saturday morning in April. And it was not the dramatic version of happiness, and was not the resolved version of certainty, and was not the ending of anything, exactly. It was something more like the feeling of standing on ground that has been tested and has held, and understanding that tested ground is the only kind worth standing on. She did not know, with certainty, what came next. She had not arrived at certainty. She had arrived at willingness, which was different, the willingness to find out, to let the next thing be the next thing, to stop measuring the distance between who Lucien Vescari had been and who he was choosing to become, and start paying attention to the daily evidence of the choosing. She had a program to run and a cookie situation and 14 children and a golden retriever and a storyteller who was now 2 pages into a story about a very opinionated encyclopedia, and all of it was hers. All of it was the life she had built from what she'd been given and what she'd given up and what she'd refused to give up. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole of what she had, and she was not afraid of it. Marcus laughed at something the storyteller said. The sound of it was sudden and clean in the way of children's laughter, uncomplicated by awareness of how it sounded, just the immediate expression of finding something genuinely funny. And Lucien looked at him when he laughed, and the expression on Lucien's face when he looked at the boy was the kind of expression that doesn't have a name exactly, but that tells you everything you need to know about the state of a person's interior life. The expression of someone who has stopped calculating what things cost and started paying attention to what they're worth. Elena watched that expression for a moment from the side wall. Then she went to help Diane with the cookies. Outside, April was doing what April does in Boston, which is a temp spring with the erratic commitment of someone who hasn't entirely made up their mind. Sunshine and clouds in rotation, the temperature climbing and dropping throughout the morning, the trees on the street out front putting out their first tentative green against the still gray sky. The city moved in its ordinary way around the library, cars and people, and the ordinary machinery of a Saturday in a neighborhood that was nothing special and entirely itself. And inside the Roslindale branch, the storyteller read, and the children listened, and the retriever kept his post, and the ceiling was sound, and the cookies were going fast. And 2 people who had found each other on a rain-soaked bus in October were in the same room on a Saturday morning in April, neither of them the same as they'd been, both of them present for what came next. That was all. That was, it turned out, the whole of it, and it was enough.